Hi everyone, thank you for coming down tonight. Forgive me if I repeat something that's already been said. I don't know French too well. That's my business partner, Nick. We actually went down to NAB in 2006, where we put our deposits down for the camera. It was $1,000 at the time. I think it still is for anyone that is still looking to get a camera. And fortunately, we got ours at the beginning of September. We went down to Vegas LA, and picked up the cameras. We have 50 and 51. Overall, it's been pretty exciting, very different experience. Both of us come from years of film production background, working in commercials, music videos, films, short films, anything. And we started our own company. Basically, it started because of this camera, essentially. We both wanted to do our own projects, and we both freelance in Toronto and work with a number of production companies there. And when we heard about the Red, we didn't believe it at first. Nick actually showed me this tiny ad in a magazine or I think it was online even. And it was ridiculous trying to read the specs for this thing. It was like 4K and off speed and 120 frames and PL mount. It was like, who's making this camera? It's impossible. So lo and behold, it's actually true. We've had our ups and downs. There's been a few bugs, as with any new piece of equipment and gear. There's always kinks to work out. I guess we're here tonight to answer any questions you have about the camera. So I'll boot up the camera. It takes about a minute to start up right now. Red basically is, when they released the camera, when we first got it in September, there was very little it could do. It could only shoot 4K at 24 frames. That was the only mode that was enabled on the camera. There's a lot of functions, as most of you probably already know if you've been following the site, that aren't enabled on the camera yet. But slowly, we've been getting updates through email that we simply just dump onto our compact flash card, straight from a memory card reader, and put into the camera, and the camera says, do you want to upgrade the software on it? And so we've been getting these email updates weekly, and it's been, again, like, there's so many different things that the camera can do that they're trying to enable functions like off speed, which just recently was enabled. We now have 2K, 72 frames. Sorry, the camera will shoot off speed up to 72 frames in 2K mode. In 4K, it shoots 1 to 30 frames right now. This is what the camera, I'm sorry, I talked through the whole boot up process, but if you listen carefully, you can hear that there's a fan that comes on. Again, I don't know all the internals of the camera, but what Red has told us is basically there's fans lining the bottom. It's like a computer inside. The whole thing boots up. The fans are there to keep the board, everything inside, cooled. And yeah, those actually turn off when you record something. You actually try and shoot. Basically, there isn't a lot of information displayed on this. You'll see Red has it's kind of hard to see on that projector up there, but Red has a very simple interface for what the camera actually displays out of the HD SDI. What we have connected right now, and what's working right now, is simply one video output at a time. You can only use either the Red LCD or the electronic viewfinder that they're developing. We still don't own that yet. It's still being manufactured and tweaked. But only one video output works on the camera at this time. So the way we have it set up right now is so that we can actually show you guys an image on other monitors. If I turn on the red LCD here, you'll see a very different interface. Basically, with the red LCD and also the electronic viewfinder that will be coming out sooner than later, you'll have all this information displayed on the red outputs, which are the proprietary DVI connections to the red monitor and the electronic viewfinder. So down here, you can see what mode you're shooting in. You can actually see if you have a card in the camera or not. It should actually show up. You'll see it, the mag display is actually changed to none attached. What you have displayed here right now is the project mode that you're shooting in, which is 4K, 24 frames per second, and a 4K RAW. That's the only format that the camera will actually record to, the red code RAW. And that is their compressed, their compression, they call it red code RAW, and it's meant for these compact flash and the red drive, which will be out eventually. You also have a temperature gauge here, which tells you that the camera is okay, it's not overheating. Your media meter here displays how much time you have left on the mag in a percentage. There's 13% left on this mag, and it also displays your battery information. In this frame line here, you can see that this is the actual image that's being recorded. Outside of that, you have a safe zone that you can see if there's anything crawling into your frame. I actually enjoy this setup very much. It helps me as an operator, as a cameraman, to see what's creeping into frame without knowing. Most video cameras out there today don't have this kind of display where you can actually see what's creeping into frame. Up here you have your color temperature, which you can, everything is mainly controlled off this one joystick on the back of the camera. You have your menu options. Everything that you can do to the camera is pretty much on the back end. I can change my white balance to 5600, or anything I want for that matter. Again, all the information that's being recorded to the card is in a RAW format, very much like a digital SLR. So you can go in and change a lot of what you've set in the camera. Basically, what you're doing in the camera is just setting a look. And I can go into the software later and non-destructively change the white balance, the ASA. The only thing that really matters is the exposure at which I set the camera to and the shutter angle. ASA, I can dial in anything I want and also adjust that in software. In my opinion, in anything I've done so far, I've actually stuck to the 320 ASA that they recommend, just because it's what the camera's rated for and it's what it shoots natively. So even though I can dial in any ASA I want up to 2000, it will actually, this, in my opinion, actually affects the quality of the image. So I tend to shoot everything in 320. So as you can see, a 65 mil on this camera is exactly what you'd find on a film camera. The depth of field, all of that is intact here because of the sensor size, which is true to Super 30, or it's the same as Super 35 film. You can see it's a very nice image. Again, you're looking at a 720p image, but you can still see the characteristics of the depth of field. It's all very film-like. Also on the camera, okay, it's going to be a little difficult to navigate through. Basically, when you're enabled in this, when you're actually in this hookup with HDSDI out, you lose a bit of the information, the menus and everything at the bottom half of the screen. Whereas on the red LCD, all of that information is still there. You also notice the meter bars are missing. That's again because of the resolution of the monitor, the red monitor, and the electronic viewfinder will have all that information there too. This HDSDI output is 720p right now. I think eventually it's going to be 1080, and you'll be able to turn off all of this frame line information so you can get a clean image, so you can basically tether it to a deck and record information there. just see what I can guide through here. The frame guides. Another great option in the camera is to set any type of frame guides that you want. I'm going to have to navigate this blind, unfortunately, but you can change the color of your frame lines to anything you want. If you're shooting a white room, you could have black as your frame guide. Sorry. Let's just change it to white here. So we have our 4x3 guidelines here. Again, none of this information is recorded to the actual card. You get a very clean image. We can do some, actually, Mark, if you're, is Mark around? We can actually record some footage right now and dump it to the computer. I don't know if that's part of tonight. I guess he's stepped away. You should think of this camera. Again, it's very new and it's still in a beta stage, and there's still a lot of things that are being worked out. For the most part, it is functional. We've been using it nonstop. As I said before, we've had our share of bugs and problems with converting footage and trying to do that quickly, because in this day and age, everyone wants everything fast and tomorrow and as soon as possible. So for the most part, we've been having a great time with the camera, and later on I can answer any questions, or even now if anyone has any. As I mentioned before, we get updates through email, which are basically firmware updates for the camera, which we just dump into the camera and upgrade it to a new build. As Red is developing these, it's basically like they're turning dials in a factory, because as soon as they do one thing to fix one problem, something else comes up. And they don't really, unfortunately, I guess they don't have the manpower down there, because it's still a very new company and there's not a ton of people working down there like Sony or Panasonic would have. But some of the issues we've actually had were when we were shooting in 2K and it was off-speed was enabled. We were trying to shoot some footage at 72 frames on an actual project, and for the most part it was good, until we finally checked a few of the last of our cards and we had some major artifacting. But that, when we showed this to Red, we have a very open relationship with Red where we can talk to them directly in email and on the phone, and we ask if they've seen these problems before. And again, it's a learning process for them too, because they've only have 100 out there, and they're learning what's going wrong as we're using them as well. But the problem we had were the big artifacts that we have. I think I brought my laptop, so I could probably pull that up later and show you an example. But that was something that they blamed on the type of compression that they were using to actually get up to 72 frames wasn't fully there yet. So when they saw the problems we had, they actually went in and looked at the code and fixed the problem. So fortunately, unfortunately, we were the guinea pigs in that little project.
So all the problems that you had, they have been fixed?
It's, for the most part, yes. It's hard to say, because every time we get an email update, there's something new enabled in the camera. And so no one really knows what's going to happen, because we've been shooting in so many different environments and shooting trees and sky, and all of that was a factor at first. Actually, now that you mention it, the very first problem we had was when we were shooting in 4K mode, 24 frames. The first day that we had the camera, basically, we had this codec error, and it would pop up with a big X on the screen. And it was basically, when it came down to it, and we were talking to Red and all the testing that we did, we actually noticed that it was when you were pointing the camera at something that had a lot of detail, like trees or grass, where there was a lot of information going on, and it was trying to compress that 4K all into this red code RAW that records to the compact flash. It just couldn't do it. It would bottleneck and it would stop. That was fixed in the next build. The 2K problems that we had were actually fixed in the following build as well. There was also another problem where basically you got to think of this factory as like, there's like 12 main people that are there actually working on the camera. And they're basically the software engineers and the hardware engineers that are developing all the little bits and pieces for the camera. But there's also another group of people who are developing the software side of the camera. Scratch, who's made by, who's it? Assimilate, exactly. They're working on the software side of the camera. And if you look at Red Cine and Red Alert, Red Cine more so, you'll notice that the interface is very much like Scratch. So it's kind of hard to say, but the guys in the factory who are developing all the little, developing all the algorithms for the camera to get it working and functioning aren't passing that information on to the software side of things, or the software doesn't get enabled at the same time. So we have all these modes that we can shoot on the camera that aren't fully supported in the software yet. So one time we accidentally set the wrong mode in the camera, and we were stuck with footage that we couldn't pull up. But fortunately, Red sent us the beta version of Red Cine months ago, and we were able to save our footage. It wasn't saving our footage. It was basically just getting the software to actually read it. We explain to people anytime they want to use the camera that it is still a very new project, a very new camera, and that all the functions of the camera aren't enabled yet. And everything that they've read about, and they say, well, it costs this much, it's got to do this, and we have to explain it to them every time that everything is not there yet, that we might experience some problems, or we may ride along smoothly.
Are you encountering those problems when you are pushing the camera? Are the basic setups running okay?
It's, in basic setups, yeah, it works totally fine. We've been able to shoot 4K, 24 frames, no problem in any environment since like build 2 of the camera. It's kind of hard to say whether you're pushing the camera or not, because the guys who are actually developing the software for the camera and all the builds for the camera really are probably not testing it in the same environments that we are. We go out and shoot trees and skies and underwater, whereas they're probably in a factory just shooting charts. So, you know, everyone's experience with the camera is different, and so that's where, you know, certain problems may occur, and we just basically tell Red, you know, like, we found something that isn't working right. This is what we were recording. This is what frame rate we were recording. We give them as much information as we can. We also can fortunately just simply upload the files that we record because they're so small, like an 8 gig card. I can upload it overnight, and Red's downloading it and reading all the metadata and figuring everything out. So it's been this back and forth, basically, that's still a work in progress.
Because it's recorded raw, then it means that you can jeopardize your production. You don't really know if you have recorded this and it's correct.
Very true. For this reason, the type of workflow that Nick and I have been using on all of our projects is basically a similar setup to this, where we will tether the camera to an actual computer system and record the HD signal coming out of the camera through this HDSDI, and that's basically our backup. So if for any reason, you know, like you said, sometimes we won't see the problems until we get into post. Most of the times we are dumping the files on set and just doing a quick check to make sure everything's okay. But, you know, just like being on set on any other shoot, things are fast and things are happening so quickly that you really need like one person sitting there just looking at footage. And we've recommended that, but we basically, in this scenario, because of all the, you know, bugs that still need to be worked out, have been recording a backup image that we can save the production with if worse comes to worse. We basically had to do that once on a shoot where we were getting that major artifacting. And that was, again, like, sure, we did a camera prep the day before. We shot some kids running around at high speed. It looked great. And then our actual shoot was in a park. And we were recording trees and dogs and kids and all this information in the scene. And that's, you know, one of the reasons why Red believes there was some artifacting because of the way the compression was working. The question was, sorry, what's your name? Jim. Jim has heard that taking out the memory card will actually reinitialize the camera. So you've heard that it actually turns off while that's being done. I've never pulled a camera out while it's recording. I mean, we could try it right now. I don't think, basically what Red has said is, if for any reason the battery was to die while you were recording, all of your information would be on the card. It wouldn't actually affect the camera or the footage that you shot. So again, I haven't pulled it. We can try it right now, I don't mind. We'll see if it actually happened. Record some information. It just buffered itself. It thinks that there's a mag in there. It didn't turn the camera off. The footage is probably usable though. Because we live in Canada, of course, we did our first night shoot in -5 weather in Toronto. We actually did another shoot before that in like -2 in a forest at night. We had no problems the first night, but the second night, when we were outside all night long, we had a problem with the camera where it would reboot or it wouldn't boot in the cold. We basically had to warm up the body, and that night we actually ended up lining the camera with like thermal pads to try and keep it warm, and we were able to keep the camera going that way. But unfortunately, Red is aware of the problems. We're not the first people to experience this, but Red is very interested in working with us directly because we live in this environment. Nick and I, fortunately, have the first 2 cameras up here in the cold, so they're looking for our input and our experiences with what's going on up here. For the most part, though, I mean, what we did do was just warm the camera up, and we were totally fine. We had there's basically these fans that are meant to cool the body underneath on the bottom part of the camera. It's kind of hard to see up there, but you can actually feel the air being sucked in, and one of the theories is it's just sucking in so much cold air that it's affecting whatever's in there, the sensor, the board, the motherboard. It's a gray area right now. I mean, as we all know, like digital is very new for most insurance companies, and like on a film shoot, they're totally fine with insuring it with your camera prep and everything. Because of the way we record our image, we have a backup and also the Red cards that we record, and we store all of our information on RAIDs. We're able to get insurance fine on our productions. Actually, it's funny because we just came back from LA 2 or 3 days ago, and we got most of our parts that were back ordered, and some of the pieces were actually the handheld pieces. We had the actual shoulder mount for the camera, but we didn't have all the hand grips and the actual. I'll show you all that stuff later, but we got all the pieces needed to make the Red handheld work. Before that, for any handheld project, I was just using standard 535 shoulder brace. It worked fine. The only drawback was that we'd have to have an onboard, another HD SDI monitor, so a director could see the image. And I was basically operating with a huge monitor like this, or a Marshall, you know. So the camera did get heavy, but we should be getting our viewfinders soon enough, and that will change a few things. Actually, in the last build, multiple video outputs have been enabled. So now it's not just you have to use this onboard HD SDI. Through the electronic viewfinder, you'll also have HD SDI coming out. It doesn't work with the Red LCD just yet, but you won't have to have like an onboard HD SDI monitor attached.